I'm Dan Katz. I am the chief scientist at NCSA and an associate research professor in the Siebel School of Computing and Data Science and the School of Information Sciences, all three of those here at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And I'm going to talk about research software engineering a little bit, just generally to set some background. US-RSE, United States Research Software Engineer Association. And I'm going to talk about this as a co-founder of the organization and a steering committee member for the first 4 years that we had a steering committee. This is based on a longer talk that was at the German RSE conference last year. And then I'll finally talk about ReSA, the Research Software Alliance, and I'm also a co-founder of that and currently the steering committee chair. And Michelle Barker and Kim Hartley have provided some of the content that's in the slides there. So to get started then on the research software engineering side, what is research software? Probably everybody here knows this, but just for the recording, I will just use a formal definition that research software for us and for me includes source code files, algorithms, scripts, computational workflows, and executables that were created during the research process or for a research purpose. And we recognize that there is additional software, things like operating systems or libraries or dependencies or other things that are used for research, but not created during or with a research intent. And we would call those software in research and not research software. And this differentiation varies between disciplines. So just to give an example, if I am a computational astrophysicist and I'm using a compiler to compile my C++ code into my HPC library, that compiler for me is software in research. It's not research software. But if I am a computer science researcher working on programming languages or compiler technologies, then that same compiler could be research software. And I think it's worth just mentioning this briefly because this is one of the things that that may show up as we go through is that OSPOs are quite general and open source. And I'm going to be talking more about research software, which is in some ways is a subset of what OSPOs might do, but in some ways is also a superset because some research software is not open source. Certainly the majority is, but not all of it is. And we try to think about the part that isn't as well. Okay, so research software often comes in research. It seems like this has been going on since the beginning of computing. Software seems to me that it started appearing around 1948. Research software and specifically weather started to be in the early 1950s, so not very long afterwards. And software engineering started in the late 1960s, again, as far as I can tell, and it was mostly applied to operational software like operating systems and NASA operations at that point. So then we also have the fact that researchers, including faculty, generally don't know good software practices, and software engineers, particularly in industry, don't really understand the context of research. And students and postdocs generally don't know good software practices, at least when they start, and don't stick around. So maybe they learn them over time, but then they often leave. But some of them do stay, and they might join the staff of an institution, whether that's a university or a national lab, or even the research lab in a company. They may join the staff unofficially. They may not have a title as a permanent staff member. Their title might be postdoc for a long, long time. But it may be actually, they may have a permanent position as well. And again, I'll talk about research software engineers in the second part of this. And so some of those staff members then that do stay basically are people that do have both that research understanding as well as software engineering skills over time. And so we can think about this in kind of two ways, the craftsperson and the scholar. And we can think at a university in particular, there are lots of people who are scholars, they're researchers that want to understand things, they find intellectually demanding problems, and they do curiosity-driven work on a topic until they understand it well enough and they pass on that understanding through teaching. And then we have craftspeople who build things. And so they want to build things that really define what they've done and what they understand. And these are people that feel pain when they make something that's fragile or ugly or more so than it should be. They prefer to make things that explain themselves, and they have pride in those things that they create. And scientific software requires people who combine both of those. And I want to point out that this is coming from a blog post from 2012, which is the first time that I'm aware that this kind of thought process was gone through and people started thinking about the need to have people that overlap these two different roles. So research software engineers, then again, if we think about software engineering and research as axes, we can think about people who are really good software engineers but don't know research, and we can think about people who really are good researchers but don't know software engineering. And then we can also think about researcher developers who are quite good at research but also know a fair amount of software engineering. And these are the people who 20 years ago would have been the hero PIs that were developing kind of big codes in the original kind of academic community codes in some ways. And then we put research software engineering kind of in the middle. Maybe not quite as active in any one research field as a researcher developer, but hopefully with a bit more software engineering skill. And of course, this is a cloud. There's not really one point, but this is a range of places. Okay. So in 2012, as I was saying a couple of slides ago, people started thinking about this, and there was a breakout session at the Collaborations Workshop 2012, which was in, I think, Oxford, if I remember right, somewhere in the UK. And what folks at that workshop did when they were thinking about these two different things of software engineering and research realized that a lot of people were already doing both of these, but they didn't have a common title. And in fact, they discovered that in the UK, there were 194 different job titles that were being used for people that were doing some part of software development and some part of research. And so they agreed that they would come up with a common title and came up with research software engineer. Not that it's necessarily the best thing, but it's something that everybody agreed on and wanted to join together with. And they realized that there was no community, so they started associations and societies. And they realized that this wasn't considered a profession, and so they started building career paths and structure. So 12 years later, we have this movement in term research software engineering, research software engineers, born in the UK. In 2013, the UK-RSE Association formed with about 50 members at that point. It's now a professional society, a professional nonprofit, with about 700 dues-paying members and about 6,200 people in the community. And there also are similar associations that have formed and are reasonably well off in Belgium and Germany and the Netherlands and the Nordic countries and Australia and New Zealand. And in the US, we have US-RSE, where we have about 3,000 members today across universities, national labs, and industry. And we also have RSE-like groups. There's one called Devlog that exists in France that's actually a year older than the RSE movement, which maybe is part of the reason it's not called RSE, but it has a bunch of similarities. And there's new associations forming in Africa and Asia and Canada. And these associations overall work on local issues collectively within their organization, within their nation or region or whatever, and they can coordinate across countries where that makes sense. And so that happens to some extent as well. Okay, so that's the research software engineering part overall. Let me dive into the US part of this a little bit. So US-RSE, the organization that I mentioned previously, has a four-part mission of creating a professional community to share knowledge, connections, and resources, to promote the impact of RSEs on research, and to highlight this role, to provide resources to RSEs, access to information and material that can support individual RSEs and groups, and to actively promote and encourage and improve diversity within the RSE community, whether that's within US-RSE or more widely. As I mentioned, we're slightly over 3,000 people as of the end of last month, so we've been kind of growing fairly consistently since we started really publicizing things in 2019. 2018 was kind of an internal working year more than anything else. And we have members who are pretty much around the world. Of course, the core really is in the US, but we welcome people from other places, particularly where there are not strong RSE organizations or people who want to work with us. We use working groups and other groups to form community or communities, depending on how you want to look at it. And so we have working groups that look at code review, DEI, education and training, particularly for RSEs, group management. So how do you run an RSE group? Mentorship, outreach. There's a group that focuses on RSEs in national labs, which is one of the areas that seems to have some distinct characteristics compared to academia. Testing and software testing, user experience, UX and UI, and the website. And the website is a little bit internal because that's really the US-RSE website and how we maintain it. There also are affinity groups. So we have a group leaders network for the leaders of each of the groups at different universities and different labs. And there also is a neuroscience group at this point, which is kind of an experiment to see if disciplinary groups make sense. We also have regional groups in a few places at Chicago and in the Front Range area of Colorado and in New England and New Orleans. I apologize if there's background noise. It's getting a little bit louder here in this hallway. US-RSE also then does a bunch of different events. So we do internal events for our community, like community calls, which are monthly. And we have a Slack channel for those. We have a speaker series on DEI. We have a media club on DEI, where people either watch movies or read books or do different things and get together to talk about those things. We have an education and training seminar series. And we have had in the past, and it's a little bit of a hiatus, a funder speaker series where we get people from different funding agencies to come in and talk about how they support RSEs and how we can help them design better programs in the future. We've done some standalone workshops. So in 2022, we had a community building workshop. We had a virtual workshop in also that year. And we had a career support workshop with ADSA, the Academic Data Science Alliance, also in 2022. That produced a guidebook on RSE and data scientist career paths in academia. We also work at conferences. So from SC20 through 24 this year, we've had an RSEs and HPC workshop every year. We've had a booth at US-RSE for the last 3 years. We've had a workshop at eScience 2 out of the last 3 years, a panel at PERC a little while ago, a booth at PERC this year. We have a booth at AGU this year where I am now. And we also do evening socials and meetups. So if anybody is at AGU or knows anybody here that's an RSE and wants to meet up with us, we'll be doing that tomorrow evening. So they can get to us through the US-RSE Slack or contact me. One key thing that's made a big difference for us is a Sloan Award from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. This was a proposal that we wrote in 2022-23 at the kind of the end of the year, beginning of the next year. Where we recognized that future growth of US-RSE was limited because everything that we were doing was all volunteer, and we really had no money to do anything with. And so the Sloan Award gave us about $800,000 over 2 years. It went through community initiatives, which is the umbrella 501c3 that we're part of. It supports dedicated staff, which is a half-time executive director and a full-time community manager. It allows us to give out community initiative and travel funding based on internal proposals that come in quarterly. We give out awards. So there are 2 awards given out each year. And it also allows us to pay for organizational tools and community health, such as the tool we use to do voting for the steering committee. We also have been doing an annual conference the last 2 years. So in last year, we had our first conference in Chicago, sold out with 250 attendees. The Sloan Award basically gave us the funding to pay for things initially before the registration money came in and paid us back for those things. Now, we had lots of committees and volunteers, and we tried to bring in people with less experience on each of those committees so that they could grow and work on the next year's committee. A lot of different sponsoring organizations. We had some grants for travel for students and early career participants, and a grant that helped pay for dependent care. I had a couple of invited keynotes and a panel of funders, and about 90 different things in the program, kind of a mix of lots of different things, of which maybe the most innovative was peer-reviewed notebooks that then got presented and got archived as well, and a student program. And then this past year, a couple of months ago, we had our second conference in Albuquerque, a bit more people, 270. Fairly similar in a bunch of ways, although we started to do a little bit of work to make it somewhat hybrid and tried to stream parts of it out and had a little bit more in the program as well. And next year, we'll have a conference in October in Philadelphia. That'll be our third conference. We think one of the things that we've really done that's been useful has been to increase awareness of the RSE role and title in the US. And so in terms of hiring organizations, we've been reasonably successful by having a jobs board where we've had about 580 submissions, jobs got posted in about 3 years. There's currently, I think, 16 RSE jobs and 5 related jobs. We also share intern jobs, not quite the season yet, but I'm assuming that those are going to appear in the next couple of months. It's easy for people to submit these, and then they get actually posted in our Slack channel. Sorry, this is slightly out of date. We don't use Twitter any longer. It's Mastodon, Blue Sky at this point where they get posted. And then we also see increased usage of RSE title in new jobs. We've had two special issues of Computing and Science and Technology that focused on RSEs in the US in 2022, which was nice. And we've produced a couple of different joint documents. The one I mentioned previously with the Academic Data Science Alliance on hiring, managing, and retaining data scientists and RSEs in academia, and one with the IEEE Computer Society that's part of their career guide series to talk about for people that are maybe undergrads in CS that are interested in becoming an RSE, how would they actually do that? We also are happy to see increased awareness showing up with funders. So this is an NSF call that came out last year, and it includes things like research software engineers when it talks about people who could be paid under this work. Again, RSEs is mentioned a couple of times. Now there's a requirement for this call at least to have an RSE mentoring plan or professional development plan. And proposals are encouraged to consider how the people they would hire would work with national organizations that includes US-RSE. So we're quite happy to kind of be showing up on the radar of the funding agencies where they actually help us and we help them, and we together help the community do better research. So we've been doing this now for 7 years successfully, with we hope more to come. In 2018, we were a small group of about 9 to 12 people that were thinking and planning and starting to build. And then in 2019, we started growing, and we've got about a 300 times growth in the community. Almost everything there, from the website to the financial sponsor, has been replanned and refreshed at least once and sometimes twice. And we see that we've had a pretty community and some institutions and some funders. Going forward, we now have professional staff in addition to volunteers that help us add stability and allow efforts to be more continuous. We're expecting more community growth. We think we'll have sustainability challenges. And so one issue here is that the staff are being paid by this loan grant right now, and that's a 2-year grant. And so how do the staff continue to be paid after that? We're starting an organizational membership model, and I think that will work. I think we have 6 organizational members at this point. So it's not a huge amount of money yet, but if we can get somewhere around 20, then we're kind of in a much different situation. Annual conferences will keep going, and we hope that we'll keep increasing our impact on institutions and other parts of the research ecosystem. Finally, we're focused on US impact, but we welcome people from other countries because a lot of the topics we're looking at really are global. And we see ourselves as open and wanting to collaborate with other groups and other associations and other societies, such as CURIOSS, as another group or an association, especially if we can find common outreach and advocacy issues that we can work on together. Okay, and then the third thing I'll talk about is the Research Software Alliance. So ReSA was founded in 2019. It's a fiscally sponsored project under a different 501c3 umbrella, Code for Science and Society. All of our financial information is online. It's led by a steering committee that I chair with people from a variety of different countries, continents, and roles. Our leadership is really staff people who are funded, a director, a community manager, and a program manager, as well as a community engagement partner. We consider our stakeholders to be funders and policymakers and leaders and influencers and publishers, and we really feel that our job is to work with these stakeholders, and they then work with larger communities. We do not necessarily try to work with kind of the large community directly. What we do is work towards our vision of research software being recognized by and an integral part of the research ecosystem. Again, we want to do that by working with decision makers and key influencers. And we effectively do that by 3 different things: by exchanging information to increase knowledge flow within the community. And we do that by collecting information from the community and then broadcasting it out. And we try to engage with other community members to solve problems. So we try to bring together community and expertise. And we interact through forums and task forces and blogs and other things. And then we try to help lead this global community. So we do that through other members giving commitments of in-kind or cash resources, and that then gives them involvement in the leadership and membership. And we use that then to all 3 of these things to try to do this work. So one thing that we do is we have a funders forum. We started this 2 years ago with support from the Sloan Foundation. It's a collaboration of about 60 funding organizations worldwide, and the aim is to share funding practices, particularly about research software engineering, research software, under the role of software in research, the role of software in publications, etc. We want to address research software community challenges, facilitate networks and collaboration among those funders, and consider how to achieve long-term sustainability for research software, so that when funders support software, whether they're doing that directly or indirectly, that software continues to be around and be useful, and they don't then have to give additional money to somebody else to build something similar the next year. The Funders Forum meets virtually every 6 weeks, and we meet twice 12 hours apart for global time zones, and we shift this by 4 hours each time. So we try to mix effectively people in Europe and the US sometimes, people in Europe and Australia sometimes, and so forth. We had an in-person workshop in 2022 in Amsterdam. We got 40 funding agencies together, and we drafted something called the ADOR Software Amsterdam Declaration for Funding Research Software Sustainability. Even though this isn't obvious, it's a URL, so https://adore.software gets you there. Last year, we had an in-person workshop in Montreal where we released version 1 of that ADOR declaration for signing. And then this year in Sweden, we had a workshop 2 or 3 months ago where we are now trying to think about how do people actually understand if this is working and if it's working for particular funding agencies or not. How do they monitor their progress? Are there common software tools that they can use to do that? The declaration itself then aims to raise awareness of the role of funding practice in the sustainability of research software and to improve it. It's a first step towards formalizing globally basic principles and recommendations related to funding the sustainability of research software, including the aspects around people. It has 12 recommendations and 4 themes. Those 4 themes are research practice, the research software ecosystem, people in research software, and research software ethics. And it also includes a toolkit that has additional definitions, details, and examples for each of the themes that hopefully will help different funders adopt and implement the recommendations. And these are the organizations that have engaged with ADOR, a reasonably wide number. And we're kind of, again, reasonably happy that this includes people from, or organizations from a bunch of different parts of the world, and organizations that are government as well as philanthropic, and a little bit of industry as well. So in addition to that, just to go through some of the other things that we're doing, some recent things that we've been doing, we are facilitating a working group called Pro4RS, Policies in Research Organizations for Research Software. It's a joint ReSA and Research Data Alliance, or RDA, working group, which is trying to build a collection of institutional policies that touch on research software, include research software, and figure out how to better share those with stakeholders. And so this is something that potentially CURIOSS might be able to help with if there are policies at your university, at your institution, and we don't have them. We'd be very interested in including those inside of our collection in the analysis that we're doing with them. We are doing some scoping right now for a community-supported potential international research software conference in next year or the year after. There isn't really a single one. There's a bunch of different ones, and we're starting to look at would it make sense for there to be a conference where different organizations come together in addition to all of the existing conferences that exist that happen kind of focused on a particular topic. We are co-chairing a new forum where we bring together research software infrastructure providers. So things like repositories and forges like GitHub and GitLab, and archival organizations and libraries and others. And the idea here is that there's a lot of different players that make up the research software infrastructure ecosystem. And sometimes they work together well, kind of pairwise, but they haven't really had a place to talk to each other overall and understand what kinds of connections there are and what we can improve. There's a new ReSA task force now, 2 new ReSA task forces, one on actionable guidelines for making research software fair. Now, we were involved in defining the FAIR principles for research software 2 years ago. And we're also doing a review of that now 2 years in to try to see if anything needs to be changed. And we're also supporting the RSE community. So we're the secretariat for the International Council of RSE Organizations, where those organizations get together every month to 2. We've been compiling a list of resources on how to create an RS group within an organization, or how to create an organization or an association, and how to contribute to RSE research. And we co-authored a position paper with the Digital Research Alliance of Canada on the criticality of research software and AI-driven research. And then we've also been using that in an RFI that the Department of Energy had recently, and we'd be happy to reuse that in other places as well. In terms of just ongoing activities that are not quite as recent, we are facilitating community forum and discussion. We do this through analysis of issues, identify community priorities, and then try to develop task forces that can work on different things. And two of these are research software authorship and code availability by publishers. We're co-leading some work in Africa with the RSSE Africa group, and in Asia with the RSE Asia Association, to identify research software community leaders and influencers and try to build up awareness of research software in Africa and Asia, as well as trying to help those organizations grow. We're providing some resources to help raise the awareness of the importance of software and research in general. And we have created and are maintaining a funding opportunities database where researchers and funders can contribute and browse. And so this is anything related to research software and funding, again, whether it's national or philanthropic or global or anything else. And then just to kind of wrap this up, some things that we've done in the past. We compiled and documented a bunch of evidence for the importance of research software. We documented the global research software landscape. We originally did this probably more focused on the first world than we should, or the global north, and then we updated it to try to make it more inclusive. As I mentioned, we co-led the drafting of the FAIR for RS principles. We co-led the drafting of the software sections of some COVID guidelines and recommendations to try to make sure the role of software in COVID-related research was happening back in 2020. And we are a partner with CZI in their essential open source for software funding. Essential open source software for science funding call, the sixth cycle that was the most recent, along with the Kavli Foundation and Wellcome Trust. So if you're interested in ReSA, you can sign up to our newsletter, which is roughly monthly. You can become an organizational member. This is really your organization could become an organizational member to help us. You could sign the ADOR declaration, either as an individual or an organization. You could provide information on new funding calls and add that to our database. You can join task forces on specific activities. You can join us on Slack, LinkedIn, or Mastodon to share what's happening in your community. And overall, you can help us raise the awareness of the importance of research software through the use of the resources that we have. So these are our current organizational members. Again, a number of funders, but not just funders, also some other organizations. And we are hoping to grow this over time as well. And so kind of just to wrap up the whole thing then, thinking about what different people can do as a community in this bigger space of research software engineering and RSEs and ReSA. I think the main things are to promote research software in general. So if you or people at your institution are authors, help them cite the software that they use. And if you or they are developing software, make it easier for them to cite, for other people to cite it. When you review things, demand that software be cited as part of that review process. Support RSEs. And so that could be supporting RSEs within your organization or within publications or within grants. And again, US-RSE, or the society that's in the UK, which is the kind of older sibling in some sense, are organizations that you can work through. Promote the ADOR.software declaration. Let me know about policies that include research software at your institution for our working group on that. Circulate the FAIR for Research Software 2-year review survey. So if you have people at your university or you yourself are using the FAIR principles for research software, over the next roughly until the beginning of March, we're leaving the survey open, and we're just trying to get input on what's worked and what hasn't worked and what do we need to define better, what we need to change. RSE and ReSA are open communities, and so you can join these, again, either institutionally or personally. And overall, just to kind of repeat myself a little bit, I think the key thing here is to raise awareness of research software as a key part of research. And to understand that research software is not the same as other research product. It's not papers, it's not research data, and it's also not business software. And it has different goals and incentives and methods and practices and workforce and education required compared to any of those. And so with that, I will end, and I'll just mention that there are a lot of other backup slides that I have, and that everything that I've talked about on all these slides are on Zenodo, so you can grab them and I can put them in the chat if that hasn't happened already. And I'll stop here. So thank you.